All right, I'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Economic Improvement Corporation of the City of Kerrville, Texas to order. It is 4 o'clock. If I could ask Delane Sigerman to ask the invocation, please.
Would you all pray with me, please?
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here in these city walls this afternoon to talk about and discuss and make decisions that affect our future. And in the meantime, help us to remember the season that we're in and the spirit of Christmas that fills our hearts and our souls with hope and joy and peace so that we can go forward in 2019 in a very positive manner. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Item number 1 is the Visitors and Citizens Forum. Any citizen with business not scheduled on the agenda may speak to the Economic Improvement Corporation. No deliberation or action can be taken on these items because the Open Meetings Act requires an item be posted on an agenda 72 hours before the meeting. Visitors are asked to limit their presentation to 3 minutes. Do I have any visitors that would like to speak? All right, I see none. We'll move on to item number 2A, which is the approval of the minutes of the regular EIC meeting held on November 26, 2018, and you should have those in your packet.
I move approval.
Have a motion to approve?
I was going to just make an addendum,
Sure.
or just raise a question on 6B. I think we should change that to vote 5-1 with Mr. McKinney abstaining instead of 6-1.
That would probably be,
That's more accurate.
7 here.
there were 7 here.
But 2 made the motion and approved it, and Mr. McKinney abstained. So, I think it's...
So that's 6 votes total. The 6 that were either for or against, 1 abstention.
That would be correct.
That's
Good
it.
catch.
It's just...
I don't
Alright.
feel as bad now.
That's okay. Any further discussion on, or any other changes before we change our motion to approve with correction?
I'll second the motion with the correction.
Ken, would you like to correct your motion to
Yeah, I
approve them
correct.
with that
Yes.
correction?
Yes. Approve
We
with
have a
correction.
motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Those pass unanimously. All right, moving on to item 3, which are our monthly reports and monthly financial reports for November. Ms. Dozier?
Good afternoon. We're going to go through a couple of things today. First, I want to talk about just the monthly reports and what happened in November. And then after that, we're going to look at some updated 5-year projection numbers. And that was something that y'all had requested, just given that you've signed some new agreements recently and are contemplating some more, and kind of want to look at where would things stand if we do everything that's on the table right now. So, but we'll start with the activity for the month of November. So the first financial statement in your packet is for the operating fund. So you'll remember there's 2 funds, an operating fund and a project fund. And the operating fund is kind of where everything starts out. And you'll see our main source of revenue there, sales tax revenue. We received $277,000 in November. It was basically flat, but a slight decrease compared to November 2017. But on a year-to-date basis, we're still tracking really close to our budget number. We also continue to accrue interest income, and we're still invested heavily in TexPool, which is earning 2.44% currently. So it's a good rate, and that investment's completely liquid and can be used to fund projects at any time. On the expenditure side of things, you'll see some just normal recurring expenditures for the debt service and the administrative services fee. But in addition to that, we have moved $1.575 million to the project fund. So that's just moving money from the operating fund to the project fund. It's not actually spending it yet. So that 1.575 consisted of $375,000 for the H.L. Kerr agreement, an additional $200,000 for the tennis center, and $1 million for the First Legion lift payment. And I know that y'all authorized $250,000 for the tennis center. We'll make that second $50,000 transfer in the month of December, but that's just looking at how much cash we had available in the operating fund for the month of November. So the remaining 50 will go over in December. All right, so that's that basically goes through the operating fund activities. If you'll look at the second page, then we get into the project fund activities. And you'll see a transfer in of the $1,575,000 that we just talked about. And then we have a transfer out of $1 million. And so that is the first payment on the Legion Lift Station agreement. So EIC actually transferred that money to the city of Kerrville. And then if you'll go to the third page, the next page back, there's a few highlights. So you'll see the sales tax revenue analysis that we talked about a little bit before. So very close to budget on a year-to-date basis. I can tell you that for the month of December, sales taxes come in very high, up 17%.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yes. A chunk of that is related to a prepayment, and we've requested information from the comptroller to find out like who and what that is. We haven't received it yet, but so I'm thinking it's a timing issue with one of our large taxpayers just paying a little bit early. So portion of it is that, but even when I take that out, it's still like an 8% increase. But once again, we don't have the detail on it yet. It takes about a week for the comptroller to get us that detail, so we'll have to dig in. But it looks promising, so.
I was thinking it was
So,
ladies'
so it
night
wasn't
out.
Santa Claus?
Well, it could be.
Oh, could have
You
been.
never know.
All right,
Yeah.
okay.
Checks in the
I'll let
mail.
you know next month. So, but yes, so that looks promising. And then the middle section here is the cash analysis, and you can just see that we have everything invested in that EIC text pool account. And so EIC right now at the end of November has about $3.5 million available. Down at the bottom is the project fund balance. I changed this up a little bit. I'm trying to figure out some ways to make this easier to understand and easier to look at. And so I'm looking at, in the project fund, we have $3,425,000. And so of that $3,425,000, what is that allocated for? How much of it is already assigned to something versus how much of it is unassigned? So the committed projects down below, you can see over on the far right-hand column where it says funding transferred to EIC project fund, you can see that we have $250,000 committed to the tennis center. So that's there and available. $1 million for Legion Lift, and that would be for the second payment on the Legion Lift station, which actually won't happen until fiscal year 2020, but we know it's going to happen and we've already committed to it. The HL Kerr agreement for $375,000 and the Thompson Drive Partners agreement for $850,000. When I did this here, I had to kind of work with those set-asides and decide, okay, what am I going to take these committed balances out of because we have these set-asides going on. So when we get to the 5-year forecast, I'm going to give y'all a few ideas about set-asides. But basically, that business development set-aside, I drew that down to cover these committed projects. But anyway, a healthy, almost $3.5 million in cash at the end of November. Any questions on the current month before we go to looking at some of the forecast information?
I have a question.
Yes.
On, under project fund balance, under EIC contribution. Okay, so we have 850,000. Is that number just, okay, we did 850,000 for the Thompson project. Where is this 850,000? Is that, you just plug that number in?
So yeah, like last month, if you looked at your project fund, you would have seen that business development or economic development line item showed a $2 million reserve. And so I drew that $2 million reserve down by $850,000 for the Thompson Road project, $1 million for the second Legion Lift project, and $50,000 for that extra tennis center, $50,000 that hasn't been transferred over yet. So this is where we get into some of these kind of complicated complicating factors when we talk about set-asides and which set-aside is a project coming from and that kind of thing. So as we move into our discussion about the 5-year forecast, I want to talk to y'all about, how are these set-asides working like you want them to? Are they complicating things overly, or are they helpful? I have some ideas that I'll share. But yes, so that set-aside, I drew that down to show those committed balances.
Good.
All right. Y'all ready to move on to the 5-year forecast?
Can I just make a general comment?
Yes, sir.
Since Robert pointed out the $850,000, those are not the same $850,000. There just happen to be the same number.
That's
but,
correct.
Workforce housing there's sometimes I hear some confusion about what that means. Workforce housing is not affordable housing in particular. It is housing for people who will come here to work, and not everybody who comes here to work needs affordable housing. So that term sometimes confuses people because they think that's the same thing as affordable housing, and it's not. I just wanted to
Thank
comment
you for
on
that
that. Thanks.
clarification. Mike, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, for purposes of the EIC, workforce housing, I always consider it as one of the project definitions, which is affordable housing as defined by federal law.
Correct.
And yeah, I understand what you said, and I agree. I think there's some confusion, because the city's involved, and the city doesn't necessarily, isn't constrained by that definition. So, as long as you all understand kind of what it means, I think we're okay. But you always keep that in mind when you're talking about projects. That workforce housing isn't necessarily the whole affordable housing that you all are constrained by.
Mr. Salinas suggested we start saying obtainable housing because it covers several markets, and I thought that was, not to change this now, but just when we're conversing.
Well, the confusion was brought up to my attention after the last city council meeting.
Okay.
And because the Thompson Road project is not
Right.
affordable housing, but it is workforce housing. So but there was some confusion, and I was just trying to make a statement about that, so maybe people who are watching these sorts of things, if they're really bored and want to watch the EIC meetings, that would be good. But it's really not the same number. That's all I was trying to say.
Not
Right.
boring.
There's not really any
It's not boring.
conclusive definition of workforce housing. It's
Exactly.
what everybody determines it on their own. So we will be going through and developing a strategic plan for housing, and it will cover all strata of our economy in terms
Precisely.
of the needs for workforce housing. It could be a nurse's job, or it could be a lab tech, or it could be a police officer, but it could also be housing for professors that we don't have in
Exactly.
town.
Precisely.
So it could cover the full gamut.
That's all I was trying to accomplish.
Well, one thing that I can say, that when we developed these different phases of the budget, where we had these different tiers, we defined them as category 1, 2, and 3.
Correct.
That all was done because there was just one number. And we had anticipated wanting to put money in different categories just for us to consider for this exact same reason that we're doing this exercise today, which was how much money do we have left. It had no definite definition. It was just our thoughts
EIC
of how
deemed
we
it
would
to
spend
be.
the money for this board.
Correct.
So to get into the minutia about the definition of one of these categories is really not, it's up to us to decide, do we pull the 850 out of that category or out of another category? And it was just there for us to help ourselves understand what we had left.
That makes sense.
So,
But can I ask
That happened originally.
Mike, can I ask Mike a question? You and I have had several discussions on the use of EIC funds regarding housing. And so the last project that we voted on last month was of course, you know how I stand on it, but could make the case it was for infrastructure for the housing. But if somebody came to this board and said, well, I want to build 120 units on a piece of property that had all of the infrastructure in, okay, and he just wanted basically the city to subsidize his housing project, would you find that acceptable under the code?
If it met that definition of affordable housing under the code, sure.
Under U.S. code,
Right,
so Section 8.
right.
But if it was just a developer wanted to come in and build some market rate housing and wanted us to subsidize that, you would say that that would not fall under the
Right,
code.
and that's why the Thompson Drive was really based on the commercial aspects of it.
Well,
And if you go back and look at the.
Right, but that
the
was not
develop-
in the agreement whatsoever. That was just, the agreement was.
No, well, if you go look, I think if you go look at the agreement, I don't have it in front of me, but if you go, I always tie it to the specific definitions in this, of projects, and so if you go back and look at that, you'll see that it's tied, it's certainly not tied to affordable housing, I can tell you that.
Well, yeah, I think you decided it was considered under 501.153 a business enterprise.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I didn't decide that, remember, that's my.
That's your
proposal. That's what
interpretation.
you all, well, it is, but then you all make that finding. I'm signing the agreement as to form, and you all are, you all are making the finding, and so you're right, and if
But we're
that was
relying
it.
on your expertise.
Sure,
Thank you.
yep.
And oftentimes, agreements may fall into more than one
Yes,
category.
right.
And that would be listed in the agreement as well, so, so
Right.
that kind of can further complicate which category we're calling it, if it could be applicable to more than one. All right, okay, moving on to 5-year forecast. So I have this on the screen in case I need to point to any numbers. It kind of breaks every PowerPoint presentation rule to have this many numbers on one slide, but we'll go through it. So the idea here is just to give y'all a look at what would EIC's cash position look like if we funded everything that's on the table right now. So as we go through it, you'll see that like the River Trail to Schreiner University is included on here. I know that that's not a finalized approved agreement, but I wanted to give you some numbers that show you what it would look like if that was approved. And so we have our two funds here, so you'll see the two blue lines there. The first is the operating fund, and then the second is the project fund. And so the idea that I'm trying to accomplish here is the operating fund receives the sales tax money in and a little bit of interest revenue. The operating fund pays for basic services like the administrative fee, KEDC, and the debt service that EIC has already committed to. So those are the basic payments paid by the operating fund. At the end of the day, what's left after that, I am using this kind of like a sweep account in banking terminology, and I'm sweeping what's left to the project fund. So the idea here is that I'm keeping the ending cash balance in that operating fund at a minimal level, like around $25,000, and just sweeping everything to the project fund. So that you have a better idea instead of having to say, well, we have a 1.2 million here, and then I have to add it to a couple million here, and just to kind of consolidate things into one place. So you can see that, let's see, going down, I have the sales tax revenue in at what was approved for this year's budget. I'm assuming a 2% increase over each year, so hopefully that is a relatively conservative number, although there's a lot of talk of recession on the horizon, but anyway, but that's the assumption there. And then we have these administrative expenditures and debt service expenditures that we discussed. I made some assumptions about KEDC going out. I took it back to the fiscal year 17 level. Of course, none of that is approved and all of that's subject to change, but that's just where I got my assumption. Same thing with the administrative services fees. All that would be subject to approval each year. And then the debt service numbers are firm. So you can see that going down, we get to a line called transfer to project fund. And so that's kind of that sweep amount. It's kind of the, it's a rounded amount, but basically whatever's left After you pay these have to things, we're gonna move that to the project fund. So for fiscal year 19, moving 3.3 million to the project fund. And then you can see that gets you down to an ending cash balance of around 25,000-ish over the 5 years. Moving down to the EIC project fund, we start with a beginning cash balance, and then the only revenue here is just that transfer in from the operating fund, and you can see that it ties to that amount above on the transfer to the project fund. And then I have the projects listed. So these are the projects that are, currently in the hopper, or, have been approved or are under consideration, which would be the River Trail piece. The timing may vary a little bit on some of these, but I assumed on the River Trail piece that half of it would be paid in 19 and half of it would be paid in 20. I have the Legion Lift payment that's already approved for fiscal year 2020 in there, but nothing else really beyond that. You can see that yellow line shows you the ending project fund cash balance. So that's kind of, how much money do we have left to do projects with. So even if you did all of the projects on this slate, you can see that, we're building to almost $10 million by 2023. So there's still money available for future projects. My personal opinion is that I think it might be easier to look at just committed projects and then unallocated money in the project fund rather than having these different set-asides and then having to decide which set-aside which project comes from, that kind of thing. But I did leave the current set-aside balances that we've previously had set up, and I made some assumptions here about quality of life being where River Trail would come, the River Trail extension to Schreiner University would come out of that. And I basically just took up to 1.5 million from the approved budget that goes out 5 years. So you can see that it takes us until 2022 worth of quality of life transfers to get to that 1.5, and then we start adding to the pot again. But that's where it starts getting a little complicated and a little difficult to understand. So it certainly, should be whatever meets y'all's needs and whatever makes the most sense to you. But I think we should consider, first of all, maybe using this project fund as where we sweep all the excess money to, instead of keeping a large balance in both funds and only moving some money. And then also look at, do we need all these set-aside categories, or can we call it unallocated? And then it is a useful exercise on the back end to look back and see, what did we spend our money on? What kind of percentages are we achieving? How much have we spent on housing versus how much have we spent on infrastructure, that kind of thing. And EA will speak some more about that with this 10-year look back that he's been working on. Actually, it's more than 10 years, 20 years. So anyway, but do y'all have any thoughts or any questions?
So is the unallocated, would that be like a miscellaneous? Because there are other projects that come to mind, like the Aquatic Center. Callow Theater has asked in the past for some help with some improvements, like curtains and things. But so would that fall under the unallocated?
And this
It
is
depends on how
yeah,
we
it
wanna
depends
set
on
that
how
up.
you want to do
Here's,
it. Right.
here's how I look at it.
Okay.
Just pretty cut and dried. So at the end of your projection for ending project cash balance, it's highlighted on the screen in yellow. At the end of 19, our fiscal year 19, we have enough to fund the $1,750,000 that is scheduled to be spent in 2020, and still end up
Correct.
with a surplus, a sizable surplus. And so you keep doing that throughout the life of your spreadsheet. We need to
Just
find
keeps
some projects
building,
to spend
right.
money on. That's how I see it.
I think they're out there.
I think the good thing about having it's plus and minus everything, and I don't know that it's overly complicated, but so at some place EIC set aside these different amounts. We're really prioritizing some things and trying not to put everything in one
In one
basket.
basket. That would be.
And so I think that part is good, and I think, I don't think we should be bashful about taking out of one pot and paying another one or whatever, but it does kind of keep you a little bit in bind. If you keep having to steal out of one pot, you gotta start thinking about whether if you're really
Right.
spreading
You're not
projects
balanced.
around, and maybe you want to, or maybe you don't want to, but at least I think that's not a particularly complicated thing to deal with, and you could certainly have a total that said, total unallocated or something, so that you knew how much money, because you could play with that. Sure.
We have quite
Yeah, and that's a
variety
good
right
point
now.
too, with those set-asides are definitely not set in
Committed.
stone, and
Right.
EIC has the ability to move and change at any time based on the projects that's presented to them, so.
But you also have this category of debt service, so that at some point when you approve these projects, you allowed out some time, a period of time to pay the debt down. How long are those lines? Those kind of indicate your philosophy, what you're trying to do is carry this project over time through debt service. So what is the life of those debts?
Those are 20-year obligations.
So how much is left on, so each one, 20 years from the date's on here?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that
And,
$1 million a year is gonna be going on for at least 20+ years.
right, that $1 million is there, and that is a good consideration too as far as going forward. Does EIC prefer to do lump sum donations or prefer to do debt service? And some of that will, of course, I think depend on the project and the size and the scope.
I missed it. It just went by me. Explain to me under set-aside balances what business development is exactly again?
And I changed the name from economic development, or ED, set aside, to business development to try to be more clear. I don't know if that is or not, but
We're talking about primary development for
Yes,
primary
primary
jobs?
jobs.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's in your previous budget, which I have a copy of y'all's 19 budget here if anyone needs one. But it was called economic development set aside, and it's been on the budget for many years now at like $500,000 a year is what's been moved over to the project fund.
And the idea there originally was, if there was such a need for a company to relocate here for a lot of jobs, and we could come up with $1 per job grant, then there's plenty of money set aside in our fund to help land a big company.
And so one thing we might consider doing is set, what does plenty mean?
Correct. And then, again, there's no real definition to any of those. It was just our way of taking it from that one number, which is 2.925 for 19, and kind of saying, okay, what would we do with that? What kind of projects public are we looking for to fund? And that was how we ended up creating the set aside. Where the word set aside came from, I have no idea. Maybe we were setting that money aside for those types of projects,
I think
but
I
no
always
definition
took
to
it-
the project.
I always took it to mean it was kind of a placeholder, and that the categories were purposely broad to allow flexibility, but it was just kind of a placeholder based on broad priorities.
Correct.
Curious if maybe Mark or EA could address the potential for future infrastructure. Some of us were under the belief that that had been taken care of several years ago, and then we had a problem with the Legion lift station. Do you have any ideas of what in that category for the next 3, 4, 5 years we may need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be worthwhile for you all to have a kind of an offline workshop or something to talk about capital budgeting and what the needs are out there. We've got a master plan for water sewer. We've been talking about an aquatic center. That's not on here yet. To Mr. Barnett's point, we've got debt, which means that you really need to retain some level of fund balance above the 25,000 that Amy was talking about in your project fund, because if sales tax doesn't come in, it's a recession, we still got to pay our debt.
Right.
So, and if EIC doesn't pay it, that means general fund's gonna have to pay it, and that's not gonna work. So we need to make sure that we have good cash flow on that. So, but I think it'd be worthwhile to have a workshop to talk about the possibilities, because we do a 10-year, what we call our community development plan. or something like that, community improvement plan, investment plan, where we project over a 10-year period what we're going to be spending and where the money's coming from.
I think it's a great idea.
Because any money that the EIC can, like
do
with the
that.
Legion
I was gonna
Lift
say
Station, would
this.
save interest expense, you know, from having to borrow money for these, you know, if we have the money here, we can use it here.
Yeah, right, right.
Okay.
General comment. First place, I think this is a great start for helping at least me, maybe everybody else up here understand, or even down over there, not talking down to Don or Maggie, but to understand where we are, to look forward. And then I think with the capital expenses, things that the city has going on, which we haven't seen, that would be really helpful. But I really wanted to thank Amy. Amy and I have talked about putting something like this, and she's done it. I've tried to do it, and I didn't have the stuff to do it. But I really want to thank you for putting this together and it's kicking this ball over the cliff, because I think that with that little sit down and talking about city stuff and where possible needs are going to be coming up in the future that EIC could be helpful for would be really great, and let us truly understand kind of how much money we have to not play with, but how much of the taxpayers' money we have to spend to get economic development going on in this city. So thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. And I appreciate, D8, if you put this together, I appreciate that too. I was giving Amy credit for it, but she took it. She took the credit. I just want to let you know. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Amy while she's here?
And we can definitely schedule a workshop, just to let you know also, in our budget book that's available online. I'm also happy to get any of you a hard copy of it, that if you'd like one. The 10-year plan that Mr. McDaniel is referring to is in that book, and it's by project. We have it in two separate sections. One is related to the general fund, and one is related to the water fund. So they're broken up by that way, those two categories.
I, for one, would like to have a copy.
Okay, yes.
You say it's on the website?
Yes, sir.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
I'll go on the I'll go on the website.
Yes, but yeah, some people prefer paper though, so
I'm
happy.
an old guy. Paper is good.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Amy.
All right, thank you.
Do we need a motion regarding the workshop?
I was gonna put that in a little bit later.
Okay,
Okay.
I have it written down.
perfect.
All right, let's move on to item 3B, which is the projects update. EA?
Afternoon. Just run through these pretty quickly. River Trail, I'm not going to go into great detail about that, because certainly we've got some more River Trail discussion here on a later agenda topic, but did have the grand opening ribbon cutting of the latest section of trail going from the Lowry and the Nature Center down to the Dieter Center. Saw several of you there. Appreciate that. Appreciate y'all coming out. Really great event. Had very well attended. So we're excited about that, and excited to be able to talk to you about the potential for the next extension that we've got on the docket later. Reuse distribution lines, we are essentially functional across the extensions that were made within that system. Obviously, we reported to you all on the damages here several months ago that we sustained during the October flooding. The city is pursuing several avenues to look at the rehabilitation and potential reconstruction of that facility, not necessarily in the incantation that it took in the original form, but going through some design engineering efforts right now, some preliminary elements, as well as looking for funding sources. We're hoping right now, one of the elements that we're looking at is state Texas Water Development Board disaster recovery funding, and so that may be an avenue. We're pressing on that pretty hard, so more to come on that. Tennis center improvements, excited to relay back to you guys, if you hadn't heard already, that was approved by the city council, both the amendment to the agreement that you all so graciously provided at your last meeting, and went ahead and let that contract. So we will have a pre-construction meeting right at the beginning of January and launch off and get that going. Hopefully we can make great progress before we miss too much of the spring and summer seasons. We know it'll be disruptive, but we do think the way that we phased it, it will at least minimize what we've got going on out there, so we can salvage a little bit of this summer season and then hopefully have a great facility come next fall. Aquatics feasibility study, we are right in the throngs of that, and it's been mentioned several times here before. We did hold a second public hearing the day actually before we cut the ribbon on the last section of the river trail. So excited to keep progressing that. The next step really in the process is starting to put some numbers to the elements that the community has relayed to us that they've got a desire for, and that's kind of when it gets down to brass tacks, and we'll see what we can afford and see what kind of phasing we have to put into some of that master planning dialogue that's already come about. Downtown parking garage streetscape, we are hoping to bring that to the council in the January timeframe to garner their attention on whether they want to bring that forward to you guys. Certainly that is one of the elements, as Amy mentioned before, that you guys have been kind of socking away some dollars for from a project funding standpoint, but we don't have a formal agreement with you yet, so we will see how that progresses. Legion Lift Station, we have wrapped up the engineering on that effort, and it is out on the street. We've got a pre-bid meeting, I think, tomorrow, actually, so we're hoping for good bids here towards the end of the month, and hopefully we're letting a contract in the January timeframe. So more to come on that. Multi-year history of EIC agreements. So at your place, and big kudos to Santa for getting this together. We heard you guys several meetings ago and wanting to really have the opportunity to kind of look at historical, a lot of good work EIC has done over the last almost 20 years. And so this is just an indexing of, very basic what the agreement was and the number, and then the overall funding amount that was agreed to within the actual funding agreement. So wanted to get this out to you, and we're still going through it even with staff and making sure that, we've got all the detail in here as it needs to be. Didn't have the opportunity. It's over 130 agreements, so we didn't have the opportunity to match all of them up to every minute detail and kind of database that and pull categories and whatnot, but wanted to at least get you what we had at this point and kind of see how you wanted to continue to track on it in the future, what materials we could continue to provide for you on that effort. But just a tremendous amount of good stuff in there over the last 20 years. Certainly has made quite a bit of impact as you see go through the list and kind of see some of those names.
I was looking for a total.
We didn't even get to that point to total it all up.
I think the tape would be long.
Yes, yes.
All good stuff.
Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Well, what's gonna,
It'll take a while to come up with questions.
Yeah, a little study needed there.
Sure.
oh,
Robert, did you have?
I was curious on the aquatics feasibility study. Was that, I didn't get anything in it. Did you mail out anything to, was that a mailer to people in the city? Or was that just kind of an online survey, or how did that work?
That was an online-based survey.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just say I've only been to one of the two, but there's a lot of community interest. And it's varied. I mean, there's three options, I think, and it's all across the board as to what we'll end up with. But there was, a lot of professional people who've dealt with either swimming, competitive teaching, and so I was impressed with the turnouts that we had. And then the survey's been, 400 people have answered it and plus.
And the
I'm so-
variety of the user groups. It was just really amazing.
So they're out there, those swimmers.
Good. Well, again, thank you very much for putting this together and getting it to us.
Absolutely.
Good work.
Yeah, this is great.
All right, moving on to item 3C is the report from Kerr Economic Development Corporation. Walt, do you have a report today?
Yeah, I'm pleased to report that Gil's settling in nicely. He's actually in Austin today. We took a trip to Austin last week and met with representatives from the Lieutenant Governor's Office, the Economic Development Corporation for Texas, as well as the Economic Development Council, to begin to kind of put ourselves on the map where Austin's concerned. As the session's ramping up, I think the timing's great, and we had a series of very interesting meetings. We're socializing around an idea. It's a primary jobs idea, very, very early stages. Advanced manufacturing and character, amongst other things. Gil tonight has a meeting with other peer economic development corporations in the area, in Austin, and tomorrow he's meeting with one of the governor's folks on workforce development. That's going to be very important to us going forward, as workforce is one of our key issues. So, you know, I'm here doing this, he's out doing that. We got 2 people on the field right now versus half, and so that's a really good development. We are excited and challenged by the prosperity we're seeing in terms of sales tax generation, and feeling the urgency to put that to work effectively and investing that properly within the timeframes we have. I feel like if I go back to our original goals for this year, deployment of funds is one of them, building a pipeline is another, and putting in place the team and the board is the third. We've done the third already, and we're working hard on the first 2, and I think we're making excellent progress there. As a discussion point, we do have an opening for business person at large on the Economic Development Corporation board, and that announcement will be in the paper and elsewhere very shortly. We just finished the press release on that today, and we're looking to get some change of that part of the board as well. So we do have have installed our new city person, our new county person, and obviously Gil's here as well. So I'm very happy to report that as of our last brief for 2018, we're postured very, very well to take advantage of some resources that we brought to bear, personnel and otherwise, to really start developing some interesting opportunities going forward. And we look forward to very, very interesting and I think very productive 2019. Pending your questions, that concludes my brief.
Questions?
Just a general comment.
Yes, sir, general comment.
Excuse me.
I was looking for Gil, and I'm glad to hear that he's in Austin today working rather than recovering from Texas's loss to Oklahoma. Thought I'd throw that in.
Oh, okay, that's okay.
Being from Oklahoma, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, there's a rivalry that goes on.
There's something
here, I've
like that.
noticed. So, yeah, I just noticed that. University of Illinois, where I graduated, we don't like to make fun of Northwestern.
Of course not.
There's a dynamic up there. But anyway, appreciate the commentary and just appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all today. We've got some great stuff coming, and I'm excited for 2019. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Walt. All right, we'll move on to item number 4, which is a public hearing and possible action. So I'll open the public hearing. It is 4:42. And this is for consideration for the project funding agreement between the City of Kerrville, Texas Economic Improvement Corporation, the City of Kerrville, Texas, and the Schreiner University for the development and construction of an extension to the city's river trail to connect with Schreiner University's campus. EA?
I'm going to go, certainly we provided some information at your last meeting as the application was provided before you, but wanted to go through as we now have the fully funded or the fully developed funding agreement as directed by you all at your last meeting. So I'll just kind of run through these. Again, project summary, this is a funding request and it's really a 3-party agreement between Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation, the City of Kerrville, and Schreiner University. But essentially it's to install a little over 1 mile of river trail expansion from G Street and that connection to the trail and that trailhead there over to the Schreiner University campus. It is an amenity to help grow campus enrollment and market Schreiner University as they look to progress their enrollment from just a little over 1,300 to almost 2,300 over the course of the next 4 years. 4 or 5 years. This was identified as an action item within the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan. There is part of a connection to adjacent neighborhoods and area businesses, a driving factor there. It does provide a trailhead on that end of town, which there is not really one located at this time, as well as shared parking arrangement. The request essentially from EIC is for $1.5 million, which is what the current estimate is. This project has not been designed or engineered at this point. And again, it is a 3-way agreement. Just real quickly, again, this is a Kerrville 2050 item within the key priority area of parks and a couple of guiding principles, but was specifically called out in creating a pedestrian bike connection from Schreiner University to the river trail. This is the overall river trail map, and again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but very excited to have progressed this to basically a full 5 miles now from Kerrville, the trailhead located at Kerrville Schreiner Park, all the way over to the Dietert Center. And we have a number of agreements in place with other entities such as the Nature Center and the Dietert Center that provide sort of this shared trailhead access arrangements, really a dual purpose in helping drive traffic to those locations and helping the community embrace those locations. But also, we're not out there having to go buy additional land and put parking lots up a lot of times in these scenarios. So a lot of cross-purpose to the arrangements that have been made historically. You can see this was a River Trail master plan. We brought this to this group some time ago. Parks boards approved this, councils approved this, and these certainly are not in any numbered order, but really looking at, again, creating kind of this figure eight with a strip in between it, but really looking at eventually down the road, so this is a decades-long plan, but getting around the entirety of Nimitz Lake and then also going on the north side, what would be the northeast side of the river trail located down to Kerrville Shriner on the northeast side of the river. So kind of crossing down that functional way and then coming back up really to the G Street area and the existing trailhead that's there. So this provides an extension out to Shriner University, but certainly other extensions contemplated, potentially a sports complex and elsewhere. This is just an aerial. You can see essentially the G Street Bridge up at the far top part of the screen. The trail contemplates coming down what would be the northeast side of the Guadalupe River across 4 or 5 parcels of property, and then essentially connecting with the Shriner University property, which actually is on the south side of 27. And coming all the way down to the cemetery property, also owned by Shriner University, circling around that, going underneath the Tech Stop Bridge facility, circling around that, and then crossing over a small pedestrian facility that would need to be provided for onto close to the pavilion area. This depiction probably gives you a little bit better idea there that the trail would be the area in red. The trailhead would be the area in yellow. The area in blue is the contemplated interior campus trail, which I believe it's intended to be crushed granite that Shriner intends to build around there, and which actually helps further connect the neighboring areas really to that concrete trail that we would be looking to install. So the agreement summary, essentially EIC will provide $1.5 million in funding for the trail extension. We've contemplated as 2 equal installments, one that would occur before the end of this fiscal year, and then one that would occur in the next fiscal year. And we'll take your feedback on that, but as we were looking through the finance elements with Ms. Dozier, that's just how we set it up within what has been drafted at this point. The City of Kerrville, as an entity, will design and engineer the project, acquire the necessary easements, and construct the river trail extension to the Shriner campus, just as we've done for the other 5 miles. Shriner University will provide the recreation easements, which are the vast majority of the land that we'll need to be building on. We'll provide the easements for the parking lot at the trailhead, construct the perimeter campus trail with public access that we mentioned before that helps connect the neighborhoods as well as certainly their campus community. Provide $50,000 in direct funding support towards the project. Provide 365 days of public access, both pedestrian and vehicular, to the trailhead, generally from that Park Street, Travis Street intersection, that campus entrance there, kind of on their, what would be their north side. And then construct publicly accessible restrooms near the trailhead. That's one of the elements that we discussed with you all at the last meeting, within 2 years of that river trail extension opening. And then maintaining faculty employment levels to at least those current levels. Certainly, I think they contemplate that growing as they're growing their campus enrollment, but at a minimum, maintaining the jobs that they have there. So with that, I know we do have the funding applicant here as well, Bill Muse and Dr. McCormick, and they went through a pretty extensive presentation with you last time. We have that for you today if you want to go through it, but we will proceed as you desire.
Let me ask you one quick question.
Yes.
What's the cost per mile of the previous 5 or 6 miles we have now?
So the previous 5 miles were right at $6 million, and it really depends. Each section is so unique in the topography and the way that it has to be built. It doesn't. I can't give you an exact. This mile. Well, I can't give you an exact. This mile costs this much, and this mile costs that much.
Right.
But it really does vary. We were able to walk. Malcolm Matthews has been
just instrumental part to developing that last 5 miles. And so based off of some engineering expertise and talking consultation, looking at the topographic needs, looking at the pedestrian access, they've kind of penciled out an estimate of the 1.5.
Thank you.
EA, you and I have talked about this before. I know there are some easements that are not being provided by Schreiner University. Do we know, have we identified those people? Do we have agreements with them? Do we know how much money we're talking about? Or is that something you can discuss at this time?
Yeah, at this point, there has been some degree of discussion with those individuals. It seems to be positive towards the trail. We don't have agreements in place because we don't have a funding source at this point. So that'll be really the next step, will be easement acquisition once we get through. And that it is, us acquiring those easements is contingent upon the agreement obviously moving forward with the project.
But there's no adverse, like, I'm not letting you come across my property
At this point,
at any point.
At this point, we have not received that kind of feedback from any of the other property
Just
owners.
wanted to know.
That's right. That's right. And some of those have been received through the plating process already. So, yeah.
I had a question about under the bridge. We talked about security and maybe the cost to actually make that a secure lighted, since it definitely goes under a bridge and it looks like it's pretty heavy growth there now with, I'm sure, an assortment of things. So I was just curious if we factored in additional money to make sure it is safe and that it is inviting. And I'm sure that comes later, but it's just something we have been talking about as far as it's part of the trail. So
Yeah, we heard you loud and clear on that concern about the bridge element. It's something we're still looking into. We don't have a definitive answer for you on it yet, but it's absolutely something we're going to try to work into the design. I think we should hopefully be able to accomplish that.
good.
But under any circumstance, EIC's commitment is limited to $1.5 million.
That's correct.
Okay.
Let us come back to you after bids are open, just like we did.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Mark.
under the current project funding agreement, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You ever built a house, Gary?
Any
Gotta
other
get used to
questions? All right, now I'll ask the public for your questions. So you, if any of you have a question, please approach the podium. You have 3 minutes. I see none. All right. I will close this public hearing at 4:52 and open the floor for any discussion from you guys among ourselves. I hear nothing. So it's time to take a vote. So I'll call for a motion.
So if I had desired to just discuss a few things in executive session.
Perfect. We can
So
put this on the executive session. Good. Come back and
just a
hear
few
after the
questions.
vote. Okay.
Is it possible to ask a question to the Schreiner people?
Sure.
Oh, just kind of curious. Let's just say, for example, that the EIC was restricted on how much money we could come up with this project, just as an example, hypothetical. Is your priority to bring the Schreiner students onto the river trail for purposes of, enjoying the river trail, transacting business in that area, getting into town? Or is your priority, and don't say both, is your priority to open the Schreiner campus to the public?
Well, you're not gonna like my answer very much. But in fact, it is both. As we articulate this in our own strategic plan at the campus, we describe this as a gateway project, which it's meant to be one of several gateways in which the community has better access to the campus. But we also very firmly believe that as part of our strategic plan to increase our enrollment, that this is one of those strategies that will be a project that students will find that they want to come to Schreiner University because they have access to this trail and all of the exercise and business opportunities it provides.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you object if there was a compromise that brought the river trail onto your campus but didn't extend it around your campus?
I'm not sure.
Are you talking about the blue campus?
Well, once you go under the bridge
Mhm.
and get somewhere on, onto your campus area, where your students can leave your campus on the river trail, on that trail. It's really not a river trail once it crosses. There's no river on your campus that I understand. But if your students can get to the river trail from your campus safely without having the entire campus surrounded by a trail, would that be something that would be a compromise? Would that be something you would totally object to and say, no, we wouldn't do it at all?
Well, it is absolutely our intention, regardless of what happens with the river trail, to create a perimeter trail on our campus. That's another thing we wanted to do, so that our students, and in fact the neighborhood, isn't using Acorn Boulevard, which is a vehicular loop, to walk and exercise and all those sorts of things. So we absolutely intend to continue to do that. I would say that if it came some other place, if the river trail itself came some other place, if that's what you're asking, I'm not sure if we would object to that or not. We really took our lead here from Malcolm as to where the best design of this river trail was. So.
Okay, I guess I'm confused because I thought that not only were we taking it onto the campus, but that we were extending it onto where people could walk.
They
No,
are.
they are.
Okay,
They are.
okay,
By
so
the
it's just,
campus.
$1.5 million to get to the campus.
Right.
Okay.
Martin, could you pull the map up here
Yeah,
real quick?
okay.
I'll
How-
It's the
clarify. It's an
blue,
important
and the
question.
blue
How
that
far,
goes
yeah,
around.
I don't do maps well. You can ask my wife when we travel. So where would that be? Okay,
So.
the first trailhead, right?
Yeah, the 1.5.
Okay,
Let me see if I can get
Is
the
red.
mouse
Red.
here.
I
Yeah,
see.
it's the
Okay.
area in red.
Okay.
And that essentially takes it to the trailhead.
Got it.
Which will be located here.
Okay.
But as one of the deal points of the funding agreement, Schreiner University is funding
Okay.
the construction of this perimeter on their own campus. And that just further, what my comments were earlier, was that just further assists in the ability for adjacent properties to be able to, access the trailhead from a pedestrian standpoint.
Okay.
But as Dr. McCormick explained, that's something you guys are pursuing.
That's correct.
Really, regardless of whether the river trail. From a design standpoint, the rationale for why staff looked at coming this location, this is Quinlan Creek, and it is. We looked at coming across this way. We also looked at coming across this way. From an ADA standpoint, this is very steep, and from a cost standpoint, it was going to be very prohibitive in developing both the switchbacks that would be necessary to come up to this location, as well as the bridges that would be necessary across these chasms. Essentially would be a different class of bridge than what is required in this location. So that, in addition to just more of an ideal location from a trailhead standpoint, located close to this pavilion, really joined up in the rationale for why we developed the pathway back kind of around the cemetery, crossing Quinlan in that location, and then kind of coming onto campus in that fashion.
You didn't really study though, continuing along the river up to where the road enters the university?
No,
Because
sir.
there's a need for a light there. I know it was talked about at one time, that intersection. But what you end up having to do is create a parking space at that end of the trail.
Right.
Because I'm assuming the city owns all this land along this part here. Is that correct?
This is actually Schreiner
Schreiner,
property.
I think.
All that Schreiner property
Yes, sir,
across
on the
the
south
river?
side of 27.
All the way down to where the light would be? There's
Uh,
gonna need to be a light there at some point. You know, it's a
I
dangerous
believe that's the
intersection.
case. I'd have to look at the parcel map for the extension beyond Quinlan, but I know from Quinlan up, that's Schreiner University. But again, the reason that we did not look at a surface level crossing across 27 is just that trails usually are not extended across roadways like that. It's very much a vehicular priority, not a pedestrian
have to have a
priority.
light.
Well, even with a light, quite frankly, it discourages, most folks will not cross, that are trail users will not cross a roadway. There's a psychological barrier there.
Hit and run, so.
Yes.
Yes, sir, unfortunately.
In my opinion, as part of EIC's funding of this with taxpayer funds, if having a public parking area and trailhead and access on the campus serves a couple of purposes. Number one, it makes what we're doing here more of a public thing, more of a city thing, and it also opens up the campus. You and I have talked about the campus and having people know more about Shrine University, be more invited, let's say, to Shrine University. So I think having this public parking area and trailhead on the campus is really important for the city and for Shriner. And that is usable by anybody, although it's more usable by people in the immediate neighborhood. It is usable by everybody.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think that's really important, and I thank you for that. Thank you for opening up your campus.
All right, any other questions?
I predict it's gonna increase the business at the dining room. Hikers will hike over and eat and hike back.
It could.
Only if you try it, then it will be increased, I guarantee you.
All right,
Secret.
thank you.
Do I need to make a motion?
You do.
Okay.
And you need to quote the
Yes.
chapter.
Oh, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session regarding under section 551.087 to discuss for a little further. I had some questions regarding the draft that we have.
Do you want to include consultation with attorney?
Sure.
Okay, and I mean, I would
I
throw
mean,
that in
mine are pretty-
071 and 072 for property acquisition.
Okay, so we'll add 551.072 and 55, I don't, 073? No. that's not-
071,
071 and 072,
Right,
excuse me.
yes.
There's a lot of numbers here.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. We will move that to executive session when the time is right for executive session. All right, item number 5, we'll move on to 5A is discussion of changing our January meeting date due to the Martin Luther King holiday, which falls on the date of our meeting, which is January the 21st. Calendars, is that a good date, bad date? Want to move it?
I could still meet, but if you want to move it back to the 28th, I think. is
I
the
could still
following
meet, but I
Monday.
couldn't do it the 28th because I purposely set up a trip leaving the next day.
Right, well, I'm
Because of-
okay with the 21st.
21st okay with me.
City Hall won't be open on the
Oh,
21st.
oh.
We are
Well,
closed.
there you go.
It's a city holiday.
We can't
So
meet at
14th
Wilson?
Can we move it
I'm not sure I
earlier
can
then?
make the 14th.
So we have one no, any other no's for the 14th?
14th.
We'll just do it this way.
I don't think I can do the 14th, but all you need is a quorum, so if the majority is okay with that, that
And
would
then,
be.
how many no's for the 28th? All right, so it's our decision which way to go.
I can do the 14th, I just checked, so I'm.
So
but
either one.
Either one, yeah.
Right now, we don't have any pending agreements scheduled for you necessarily on that day. At this point, it would probably just be an update on, your monthly elements as well as potentially an economic development update in an executive session. So it will be we're anticipating it for it to be a lighter meeting day at this point. Just
So the
FYI.
14th is okay?
14th's fine with me.
14th's okay with
Well,
me?
if this is coming down to whether I like Kent or Maggie,
Oh, wait.
all right, I'm going to abstain.
It
Okay.
sounds like it's not a heavy lift, so whatever
Yeah,
you
I think
decide.
that's what EA is trying to say, so.
All right, so I prefer not to do this in a true one against the other date or
I move
whatever.
it's on the 14th.
You move it's on the 14th. We have a motion.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second for the 14th. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Thank you, Ken.
All right, so we'll move that date to the 14th. All right, we already moved to move one of the items into executive session, and I think that probably gives us the right to go do that now, even though it was kind of out of order. So we'll go ahead and move into executive session. It is 5:04. It's here. We're We're back into regular session at 5:13. Did I hear whoa, whoa, whoa?
No?
I was hearing things, okay. Again, no action was taken in executive session. And so I think Robert would like to make a statement before we bring this item to a vote.
Okay. Being the team player that I am, I'm going to vote for this project with several reservations. But really wanted to say is that my term expires in May, so it'll be almost a year and a half, and there haven't been many real job-creating business development projects brought before this board. And by looking at the previous projects, one of the biggest projects we've done is the athletic complex to the tune of between $9 and $10 million, depending on what you assign the cost of that complex. And while I know it's a beautiful complex, and I'm probably one of the few people that actually uses it weekly, and I have my DBAT card, so I go there, I question, well, I understand it was a quality of life project, but it was also sold as a form of economic development to bring people in to Kerrville. And that's why I've always thought that, you know, we should have cost-benefit analysis and not from impact studies of Austin to see what kind of return, even if we're not making any money, at least what it's costing us. Because that athletic complex originally was supposed to cost $350,000 a year maintenance when it was originally designed. And now it's, I think, over $600,000 a year. And my understanding is we don't get any income off of it for the first couple of years. So I just wanted to point out that Walt and Gil, go out. If that's what you want this town to do is bring jobs in, then let's start bringing some jobs in too. Because if you put it, try to weight what we call quality of life versus true business development, it's weighted heavily toward quality of life.
Got it. Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will call for a motion.
I move that we approve the River Trail Extension Shriner University under the agreement that has been drafted.
We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signal with your right hand raised. And it is approved unanimously because you're abstaining. All right.
Okay.
So items for future agendas. How do we get a workshop put together?
We'll work with you and the rest of the board on trying to find a date that works. We'll look at, how things line up for us in terms of other meetings that are going on, other board meetings.
So do we need to give you instruction to get a date going? Is that the formal way to do this in this meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Or a request.
Or a request, or however it.
We'd like to
Get that
request
started.
that the city assist us in planning a workshop. Usually what happens is we get a choice of times and days, and
Yeah.
that works best for everybody. So for those working hard, we can make a later meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other announcements? All right, all those, well, do I have a motion to adjourn? Let's go that route. I don't think anyone, have a motion in a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand.
Merry Christmas,
We are
everybody.
adjourned. 5:18.